Hello and welcome to the Beautiful Business Podcast, where today Chloe and I are excited to be joined by the designer, strategist, and co founder of Sonder Collective, Melanie Wendland.
Melanie has built a career solving the biggest challenges facing society, designing services and solutions with a human-centered approach, and now building Sonder Creative, a decentralized organization. We're going to hear firsthand what has worked, what hasn't, and advice for any organizations looking to take this approach.
And we really like the idea of the cooperative because it really offers a democratic decision-making platform for people to come together and manage a business together. We don't have anyone on payroll, so everybody's a freelancer. And through that, we actually keep our operating costs really lean. So when there's work, when there's a project, money comes in and people get paid. But everybody is responsible to kind of bring also business into the cooperative. So if there's no work being generated, then there's also no work for its members. But our key purpose is to provide economic opportunities for our members and come together as a community to do social impact work.
Welcome to the Beautiful Business Podcast from the Wow Company. If you're searching for the right strategies, tools, and connections to ignite your thinking and elevate your business, then join us for a fortnightly dose of inspiration. Our guests range from industry-leading agencies and cutting-edge tech pioneers to motivational speakers and executives, all offering actionable insights to help you thrive in profit and purpose. So, whether you're a growing consultancy or an agency leader, this podcast is your source of knowledge and encouragement to spark meaningful change in your business and beyond.
Melanie, welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, super nice to be here. It's an honor. Thank you.
First question we start with everyone is tell us something that we don't already know about you or couldn't find out on the internet or LinkedIn.
One is, I think, and that's maybe also highlighted too little, I think, on the internet, is that I consider work as play. And that's been like a strong ingredient since I started studying. And so I really love to think through work as, having fun, and it needs to be enjoyable. I think the other thing maybe that could highlight, I love finding order in chaos. My son is an avid Lego builder, and I actually enjoy sitting with a pile of Legos and sorting them and finding that little piece that he's missing. And I'm actually really good at that. And that's something that I only found out by picking up the Legos. But I think that's the same thing that I do in my work. I work with a lot of complexity, and then I like to find the two things that connect. And so I find a lot of joy in that.
My gosh, Melanie, you just must have a very special level of patience, because I would just be chucking those Lego left, right, and centre.
Yeah, it's kind of quite a mindful exercise.
Yeah, I love it. Unfortunately, my children have grown out of Lego, so I'm like really keen for other people's kids, like nieces, nephews, godchildren that I can do Lego with. So yeah, no, I completely relate. Work as play is like really interesting though. What happens if you need to do your expenses or there's something? Is it a more broader brush approach to it, or would you, if you have to do some menial tasks that no one necessarily enjoys, would you try and find the fun in that as well?
Since I'm a visual thinker and I also a creative thinker, I usually think through when I need to do something really difficult. I first think about how can I make this fun. And so I might, start, with a sketch, or I build myself a system through which I can see the important pieces that I need to do. And then I kind of approach, usually when I do a presentation, I first start with the layout before I start thinking about the message. So maybe that's kind of my way to dig into difficult things or hard to do things.
In your career, you have been solving some of like society's greatest challenges. How did that come about? What inspired you to do that, and how did you first get involved?
Yeah, so rolling back 20 years, I started my career as an interaction designer in a digital consultancy. And so learned what it is all about, that humans interact with, digital tools. And it was a beautiful time, beginning of the 2000s, when it was actually the beginning of a lot of digital services emerging. And we were able to do a lot of creative explorations with our customers who were going into the digital business. But then through that whole interaction design and digital world, I got exposed more and more to service design, and I did an MBA in service design and innovation that opened up this whole spectrum of, developing customer journeys, understanding how users use through a service. And there were a lot of examples from the hospitality business, hotels, airlines, but also from the public sector in terms of how do you design, a hospital and the kind of experience of patients going through there. And I think that kind of brought this whole thinking, oh, I'm designing, ways of how to increase engagement on digital platforms for users in order for a company to sell more to these users. I know a lot about the user and I know the mechanics, how I can make that work, but is that really the most meaningful kind of interaction? And so I got really, really interested in the idea of how this understanding of user needs and designing around that could actually be used as a force for good and to kind of, improve services on the public sides where you don't have paying customers, but you have kind of patients or clients or yeah, human beings.
Where did that come from? Like the fire within you to start solving some of society's, so move from solving like general problems within a business to actually thinking about some of society's biggest challenges.
Well, I think first is the nature of the problem. I think when you've done, 15 online banks, it's the same thing over and over again. But then there are these big problems that are, they are yet to be solved. Is how does a health system provide, affordable care for all of its citizens? And it seems that there were some kind of traditional tried and tested approaches that were used over and over again. So on in the corporate side, you could see all these designers getting educated in creative problem solving, but all working on commercial, maybe not so relevant kind of services, like a huge amount of, I feel like, brain power sitting in that private space that's all about generating money and selling more. And then there is this whole field, which is actually even bigger, serving society and the public and improving our how we live together. And there's such a void of creative problem solving, but we go with traditional research and process management, etc. So it really felt that there was something that designers could contribute in that field.
Did that feel in any way overwhelming for you, Melanie? Because when you talk about it, I just think, my gosh, that is such a big field to enter that feels, like you say, not many people are really touching. Like, where do you even start with something like that? Did you feel that feeling of overwhelm?
Absolutely. It was totally overwhelming. The first year, 2 years was just, I was happy to kind of get a position in a small social impact company that had just landed a project with the World Health Organization to actually integrate design in one of their research programs. And so it was almost like pioneering. How do you do that? Like work with an established research organization and bring this creative kind of thinking and user-centered processes there. There's definitely lots of things we did wrong, things we didn't know. There was tensions. We presented our insights, and they were like, "Oh, but you talked to too few people in your interviews. We need at least 100 interviews in order to make decisions in health, etc." So there was a lot of learning, iterating, and definitely sometimes a feeling of overwhelm because there are so many aspects that you need to take into consideration.
And then fast forward several years, you found Sonder.
So after having worked for a few years in this, mostly global health, but kind of social impact space, back in the day, I was working at a social impact company, but it was run more as a traditional growth company with shareholder interests. And as the director of service design and innovation there, I found myself, split between interests of shareholders and then the impact that we're generating actually with our projects on the field, because there's, sometimes there might be competing financial interests. And so we also felt that consultancies have a tendency to brand themselves very strongly and show up that, we are doing this and we're changing, people for the better. And I felt that there needs to be a more subtle way in how we integrate design into this space. And so with my colleague who I was working with at the time, we both decided to quit our jobs and try to do freelancing, because as designers, we wanted to work closer with the organization, the NGOs and the implementing organizations that are actually on the ground, who do the important work, but help them to kind of take up design processes and human-centered design processes. And then as we kind of started our freelance life, realized, as one person, we are not going to make big impact, but we really need to kind of come together, maybe as a community, as a network. And so we were connected to a third woman who was doing similar consultancy work, and the three of us then decided to co-found Sonder Collective as a cooperative, as a collective of freelancers, because we had this idea that we need each other as a community to get projects and to work in bigger teams. But we didn't want to have all the burden of a heavy company and a CEO and shareholders who dictate how much money goes where and how we're actually doing our work.
Other bit of really keen to get into is actually the structure of your organization now. So can you talk us through a bit more how you've touched on it there, how you structured Sonder?
So we registered as a cooperative. So as we were doing research on how are we setting ourselves as a social impact business, we kind of looked at there's no business model available for social impact companies. There's the idea of the B Corp, which is a registration, I think, and that you can do, but there was no kind of business model as such. Limited companies, or then an NGO, or then we came across the cooperative, and we really liked the idea of the cooperative because it really offers a democratic decision-making platform for people to come together and manage a business together. And in Finland, we actually have quite a few big kind of traditional cooperatives. So as such, the business model is quite popular in Finland, but it hasn't really been used by consultancies or modern businesses. Mostly it's farmer or agricultural or supermarket cooperatives, but not so much consultancy cooperatives. So we are set up like that as a cooperative. You can become a member in the cooperative, but you can also be just a loose collaborator. We don't have anyone on payroll, so everybody's a freelancer, and through that, we actually keep our operating costs really lean. So when there's work, when there's a project, money comes in and people get paid, but everybody is responsible to kind of bring also business into the cooperative. So if there's no work being generated, then there's also no work for its members. But our key purpose is to provide economic opportunities for our members and come together as a community to do social impact work.
I guess if you're effectively freelancing and you're working on a project yourself, that's easy to understand. But if there's two or three of you or more working on a project, how do you, being like really blunt, how do you decide who gets paid what on that project?
I mean, we are all freelancers, but we carry different roles in the collective. Some of us have experience in leading projects. Some of us, are more into just providing graphic design services. So I think it both depends on the interest and on the input that a specific member or collaborator has in the collaborative. But basically, the cooperative is the business model through which we acquire funding, because often if we work with foundations or organizations, there are quite some due diligence processes, and you need to have certain things in place in order to get kind of a big bucket of funding to do meaningful work, because you need to account for the money and be very transparent. And so the cooperative kind of manages that, and then we subcontract freelancers to kind of work on projects. And so usually it is, the project lead who has brought the project in, who kind of then brings together the team. And then we have established most recently what we call an equitable day rate framework, where we try to ensure that our day rates are set equitably with level of experience and kind of input into the projects.
That's really fascinating. You mentioned there that there would be a project lead. So I'm just wondering, like, how it actually looks like in practice. If a decision needs to be made, if there's, I don't know, a crisis or something that comes up, how do things get decided?
Yeah. So for one, a cooperative needs to have a board of directors. So we do have a board of directors. Currently, there are 3. and they're elected by the members, but they're elected every year. So we have an annual general meeting, which is our main kind of platform for decision making in a cooperative. So the members come together and they elect the board of directors. And so the board of directors are then our kind of key authority for, signing contracts or kind of overseeing kind of our financial situation and solving crisis and also kind of guiding our operational team that manages our finances and contracts, etc. So that's one piece. When it then comes to organizational decision making, let's say anything that needs a change. Let's say that we want to do more marketing and we need a new person to run our marketing. Um, we have a system that we call holacracies. That's a holacracy. That's an operating system for self-management. And so through this system, we have a governance process. So whenever something needs to be changed in the organization, a proposal needs to be made by whoever feels like this is a good proposal, creates a proposal. It's being shared in a governance meeting with the other members, and then questions can be asked. The proposal can be refined. And then in the end is a decision-making process whether the proposal will be accepted and implemented or it needs to be further refined. And the decision-making process works in a way that we're not kind of trying to get like the most votes, but if there's no objections, it goes according to the good enough to try. So if everybody says that, it might not be, the best decision, but it's good enough to try, there's no risks involved in not in trying this, we'll go forward with the decision. And that's how we usually make decisions.
Because I'm just imagining lots of kind of freelancers, perhaps with their own ideas and things, and then just actually coming together, how that centralizes.
We kind of differentiate between, there's things that pertain to the organization, such as finance management, operations, marketing, and that's governed through the governance process with the members. But on projects, the project lead is usually the authority to kind of make decisions. But we try to be still also on the project side very inclusive when project lead doesn't go ahead and just makes random decisions, but usually it's in consultation with team members.
So how do you fund the central, like the core activities, like the business management, the finance, sort of marketing, so on?
Yeah, we have on top of, so when we develop project budgets, we develop them with the day rates of our consultants, and then we have a 15% admin fee that is kind of added on top. And so this admin fee is basically covering our finance manager and other kind of operational consultants that work with us, bank fees and lawyer costs, etc. So there's a little bit of overhead that we're making every year to both, fund our operational costs, and sometimes some money kind of is left over, then we invest it into kind of initiatives. Like, for example, this year we've invested in kind of strengthening our new business development. So we put some money towards that. That is also decided together as a cooperative. But it's written in our cooperative rules that no surplus or dividends can be paid out to kind of members, but all of the money is reinvested in the cooperative and stays in the cooperative.
Oh, wow. So that's quite interesting. So at the end of the year or the end of a period, if there's a surplus, you have a conversation about kind of investment for the next period or so on and so forth. Wow. So Sonder, day one, you wouldn't have had all of these things in place. So how has that evolved over time? What agreements were in place at the beginning, maybe to um, to ensure that you're aligned as you grew?
Yeah, it went. I mean, we've always kind of said Sonder is a prototype. So we always went with trying something out and seeing how it works and then adjusting. So we didn't have holocracy as a operating system for self-management. We just started off and said, like, let's do this first. We were 3 people. Then we got our first project. We were 8 people. We're 12 members, but we have, I think, over 50 collaborators in the network. And so we made a lot of mistakes. We also, had some disappointing situations, where in the beginning, this whole decision-making process was very unclear. Project lead were kind of considered to hold a lot of power and making decisions without, the transparency of others. Uh, what the board decided wasn't clearly communicated. And so we made all kinds of mistakes, but we all the time kind of went back and said, okay, what's not working? Let's change it if it's not working. And that's the beauty of not having one owner or two shareholders who have a very strong vision that this is how it needs to be. But as a cooperative, because the board is elected by its members, you really need to listen to the members and what they need and feel. And so you really shape the business around the needs that are bubbling up. Otherwise, next year we'll elect a different board who better represents the interests of the cooperative.
So I don't know if this is a fair question to ask, but how would you feel if next year the members like voted someone else in and not you?
Yeah, I was actually on the board the first 4 years. And then I took a conscious decision to pause from the board and let other people be on the board because of the thing that I realized, oh, I'm a co-founder, I'm a board member, I'm a project lead. I have so much power and decision making and it doesn't feel always good. And so it's also good to see things from the other side. So taking a step back and being a member and just seeing how other people make decision and contributing with your opinion. So it's been actually it's felt really nice to be able to, take a pause from taking that responsibility, but also have other people run the ship.
Wow. That feels really kind of wholesome and sustainable in itself, that there are other people that are it's not dependent on you. Many regular organizations your size are still heavily dependent on the founder or founders. And actually you've taken a move whereby there are people within your organization empowered. Surely are there not moments where you think, oh, I wouldn't do it like that, or why are you doing that? That's stupid. Why that?
I don't actually, it hasn't come. I mean, there are things, maybe moments where I might have a bit different opinion, but nothing has felt stupid or off because it is based on what people want. And so as long as you have the evidence that, you know, we're 20 people want this. If I have a different opinion, it's my problem. But the majority wants that. So that's quite healthy, I would say, yeah.
So going back to the beginning, is there anything that you know now that you wish you'd have known then?
Wow. Yeah, I'm thinking a lot. I mean, it's a lot of work also. Um, I think we went into this whole kind of self-governant and cooperative mode we kind of put a lot of effort on the projects, and that's where our heart and our energy is. And we kind of neglected a little bit developing Sonder as an organization and really seeing that choosing not to have a CEO, yeah, we did that, but then actually the CEO does a lot of work, right? And so realizing like, yeah, maybe there's a little gap in putting that energy and effort into developing the organization. So we've kind of realized that we can't kind of expect that the organization flourishes unless we also invest time and effort into that. So that's been something that we had to learn like over the years. And some of us had to burn out first because we've been doing all this, you know, fully resourced on projects because that's where we get our money as freelancers from, and then trying to kind of govern an organization on the side. So that's not been always too easy.
So if you had someone listening to our podcast today, who's read the books, who's read Holocracy, who's read Reinventing Organizations, and they really want to either transform, let's say they want to transform their organization, what advice would you have for them?
I would say that first, I think try it out, and I think like it's important to kind of have everybody on board, being in that mindset of trying this out, and if it doesn't work, we need to do something else, and having regular check-ins with everyone, whether it feels comfortable and okay to do so. But then I think the most important thing, like when we started to use Holacracy, we went 100% by the book. And holacracy as an operating system for self-management, it's quite bare bones and quite dry, and you keep all the emotions and out of meetings, and you're focusing on the task, you're focusing on getting things done. And as in a remote organization, we suddenly interacted only on the to-do level, and we suddenly removed all our meetings that were about asking, how are you doing? And how do things feel? And it took us some time to realize that, holacracy brought us a lot of really good things to help us manage decision making and stuff. But we also need to focus on the community aspect and how we're doing and how we're connecting as people. And so I think the biggest advice was to kind of see how holacracy fits into organization, and you need to make some adjustments. And it doesn't mean that you need to implement this kind of self-governance, like one-to-one, exactly how it's documented, but you need to find like your way.
Self-management or decentralized organizations are so foreign to many people. It's so conditioned to have this hierarchical structure, shareholders that, and you have this like, for example, a typical question would be, well, who's my manager? Like, well, you don't technically have a manager. Like, how do you get around that on a, like, certainly like on a people level? Someone's having a hard time, or someone needs some help developing, for example. Like, how does that work within your organization?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And we still sometimes get back. It's very easy to get back into, like, even now we have a very big project that we're running, and we have different work streams under the projects, and the work streams are led by people. And there is somewhat of a hierarchy or like a management structure, but it's kind of managing the process, is not so much managing the people. But then sometimes people come and ask, okay, yeah, but who's managing, me? It's like, no one is managing you. You need to manage yourself. But so those questions pop up. What we're trying, we do have kind of, I mean, one is having different kind of forums for people to come together and exchange experiences at different levels, kind of to make sure that everybody is being heard and issues are resolved. We do have a whistleblowing channel on Slack. If anyone, has a problem with the project lead or any other tensions, there is a whistleblowing channel that's managed by our operations team, who makes sure that we're paying attention to problems that may arise. And we are still in the process of figuring out what feedback process works for us, because yeah, we can't do performance reviews because no one is employed, no one is managing, but we need to have a way of giving feedback. And that's something we have been struggling with, and it's still something where we're kind of prototyping with how to best set that up so that it's more about, your self-development rather than somebody saying, you're not doing this right.
There must be a lot of thought and just a lot of thought that goes into who you decide to kind of collaborate with and bring into the organization, because the people that work with you must be built a certain way, really, because there are lots and lots of people out there who kind of crave, like you say, that feedback and that managerial support. So how does that come into it when you decide, like, I think you said you had like 50, was it 50 freelancers that you work with? How do you kind of communicate your ways of working and decide, actually, we think you'll be a good fit for this, or perhaps this wouldn't suit your style?
We've developed over the years like a really solid Sonder handbook that's publicly available on Notion. And so before anyone joins Sonder, they can, go through, our values and how we work and kind of what's expected. So in that sense, we try to set very clear expectations and communicate what it means to work for Sonder. But for sure, it's at the moment, I mean, this is an entrepreneur-driven organization. So this is not for people who feel like they need guidance from others. They are at that point in their career that they need a lot of mentorship and coaching and development. And it comes with a lot of insecurity, because as an entrepreneur, Sonder is not responsible to give you your next job, your next gig, but it's kind of, you need to work on that. You need to be active, you need to kind of be self initiative. And so while that has brought together an amazing group of people who are actually very driven and kind of independent, it also leaves a lot of people outside. And so something that we've been struggling with is bringing in more junior people, especially when we have big projects. Senior people tend to be busy with managing a lot of stuff, but we also need to do everything because we don't have like trainees or junior people who can kind of support the churn of sometimes, when deadlines hit. And I think the second group of people that we are kind of have realized um, are leaving out, or we have started to work more to be purposefully including, is, of course, a lot of our projects are in the global south, and we want to kind of have way more people joining us as entrepreneurs from the global south. But the way that we work as entrepreneurs, self-sufficient, we have strong social security systems around us that, as even though we lose our job, we're not going to end up on the street. But that's not kind of the reality in all the countries that we work with. So that also creates a barrier sometimes for Sonder, for more diverse kind of collaborators to join us. But that's something we're actually actively working on and trying to solve for.
I still feel like a lot of people crave leadership. And from hearing how you work, Melanie, from my perspective, I think it would be an exception to the rule. If you ask the internet, it will tell you it's the way forward, and that this is what we're going to see in the future. And I'm really intrigued by how it will work. And I wonder if generationally it could fit really well with, upcoming generations. Hearing it in practice, it does feel a little bit different. Like when you hear the word decentralized structures, you just think, well, there's no management, there's no leadership, there's no anything. And actually, from talking to you today, I understand a lot more about there is actually, you have the board, you have a group decision making, you have things there that will support people.
Self-government and decentralization doesn't mean that there is no leadership. And actually, leadership is maybe even more important. And we do have a lot of leadership, but it's distributed. So everybody can lead what they're empowered to lead, and they're able to lead based on their skill level. So it doesn't mean that, a junior person makes, senior management decisions, but it's actually giving the decision kind of making to everyone according to their abilities and experience, and the senior leaders, it's their task to kind of lead from behind and make sure that that kind of happens. And so it's just a different approach to leadership, but it's absolutely needed. Yeah, otherwise it would be chaos. And also, the clients and the foundations that we work with, they're traditionally set up, and they require from us that we show up in a certain way, right? We can't just, oh, we're this bunch of random people and we just do this work, but they actually look for structure and, who do I talk to if I have a problem? So we need to have those structures in place to do the work, and we also need to have people who are accountable if things go wrong.
Melanie, really interesting to talk about the structure of your organization. I'm keen to also talk about the work you do. Generally, you say that you take a human-centered approach to your work. What does that mean in practice?
I mean, human-centered design is, we say it's three things. It's a mindset, it's a skill set, and it's a process. And so, in terms of a mindset, is it's having an open mind to challenge your own assumptions, and to lean in to kind of discover, things that lie outside of what you may have seen before in your business. I think the skill set is in terms of, aiding you to kind of visualize, use different tools to help you visualize your process of creative problem solving. And the process is really about, going through phases of diverging and converging thinking. And so it's kind of, we refer to what we call the double diamond process, which has like two times like the shape of a diamond. In the first phase of the process, you diverge, you kind of explore, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? And you really go open and see all, that you can find that is related to a problem. And then you go into a converging phase where you actually start thinking, okay, so what's relevant for us? What are the things we should pay attention to? And then you hopefully frame that this is the problem that we actually need to be solving. So in that first phase, we would usually conduct a lot of interviews. Let's say if we work on a health program with in a country around health in the clinic, we would interview patients or clients of the clinic as well as healthcare providers, and just listen to them and their kind of how they articulate the problem that they're seeing. And then we synthesize the data and we kind of say, okay, what's bubbling up? What's kind of top of the shelf for people kind of in the situation that needs to be solved. And then we open the second diamond, which is again, we diverge. We explore 1,000 options around what could be solved. And so that's when we develop prototypes, quick paper prototypes, or engage with users in the clinics or elsewhere to kind of come up with how could we solve this, and involve users in the process. And after we've done that and tried kind of and prototype, we again go converging. So what's the solution that's kind of most promising? And we start kind of closing in and kind of fine tuning, developing, delivering, and then implementing the solution. That's a very simple depiction of a very kind of big space, but it's kind of not going in with pre-made assumptions and this is how people do things, but actually going in and seeing, observing, and listening what's the problem that people experience and how they actually would solve it, and kind of helping them to get on a process to do so.
So would the opposite of a human-centered approach therefore be going in with predetermined ideas, not speaking to people, trying to impose a solution?
Yeah, and often it is, and in the past I've also coached startups on human-centered approaches. Often startups start with an idea. There's a technology, it's amazing, and we're going to build it, and we go out and develop a business around it. And so does that actually answer a real need in the market? And does it actually solve an important problem? So a lot of startups go really far with their idea before they're actually, maybe not nowadays anymore, but maybe 10 years ago that was kind of more common. But it's kind of really keeping the pulse on what's needed and what's relevant while you develop your solutions.
So, just so I can understand this a bit clearer, Melanie. So, although it is a human centered approach because we need to find out what humans actually need, right? That's the whole point of it. It then drives back to data, doesn't it? Because by asking these questions and getting these answers from your market or whoever it is you're asking, it brings the decision making back into, well, we can see from stats and data that this is what's useful and what's helpful.
Yeah, one could even call it an evidence-based design process. You're actually collecting data that informs your decision making. You're not making decisions with your gut. And that's especially important in health because no decisions are being made unless there is proper evidence around that something actually works.
So you said before though that you coach startups. Like how would you take uh, uh, like this human-centered approach or this evidence-based approach into a mainstream business?
I think a lot of companies have made that already their DNA. I would assume like big kind of successful companies are, they have their own design teams and they're running user insights throughout the year to make sure they're collecting data from the users. I mean, if you're in the digital business, it's super easy to gather data from your usage, from your uptake, right? That you can actually include. But I think when you're at the start of conceptualizing a new idea, I think it would be much more important for startups to go out there and actually talk to people and see. I often feel that the that no, sometimes it has happened maybe that there is too much a focus on solving things through technology, while sometimes there might be a few other things on the periphery that could be really, really meaningful to be integrated into a service for people. But often the kind of energy is like, let's make everything digital. And then we forget about, yeah, what other needs could be solved for.
Certainly, bigger organizations talk a lot about having human-centered approaches, how that plays out. But for smaller business, so for example, for Wow, we've got 50, 60 people, um, a professional services firm, do a lot of good work. How could we incorporate more human-centered approaches into our business?
I think probably quite like I could see that a lot of mid-sized companies could actually include, user insights in their daily business practices because you interact with your customers through many different ways. And while y- other people are really, really tired of receiving, your customer satisfaction kind of survey, that's maybe not always the best thing to kind of collect kind of feedback and help you innovate in your space. But if you're actually delivering services, on the ground with people, interactions with people, every interaction is actually user insight. So whenever you actually interact with your customer, you will learn something about them, whether it's like how fast you did it, how happy they were, what questions they asked, what they didn't get, or yeah, so kind of how to capture and harness that.
Yeah, and structuring some of that feedback. So we've got hundreds of clients, probably thousands of client interactions per week. How do you, like you say, capture it, but not just capture it, but actually then structure that into something meaningful? I guess is the challenge.
We are currently not in the business of kind of gathering live feedback from our users because we engage with populations, vulnerable populations that are not very connected to digital channels. So our data collection is not that ongoing. And so I think there are other user insights experts sitting in companies that could speak better to that kind of ongoing data collection. And alas, I think that they exist already pretty sophisticated processes.
Yeah. So in terms of your work, is there an example that you could talk us through something like maybe a particular project you've worked on that you're especially proud of?
Yeah, let me quickly think about. Well, maybe it's a bit. I've been now for the past 6 years actually working on the same project, and that's been filling up 100% of my time. So maybe that's the project I can easily talk about. It's a project called Pathways that has grown from a single project into like a global initiative where we're actually working in multiple countries right now. And the goal of that project was to kind of understand what are the social, cultural, and economic kind of factors that influence health for women and their children in low resource settings. So the level of education, the type of house you grow up in, the environment around might shape, how healthy you are or how healthy behaviors you can actually um, kind of expose yourself to. And so in a lot of contexts in for example in sub-Saharan Africa, it is still very difficult for women to get to a facility when they're pregnant and get checked up and deliver their baby healthily. There's a lot of incidents of maternal deaths and child deaths. And so that we're trying to combat with a big research project where we've understand. So, you know, what are those social factors that sit around, in the communities, in your household, in the education that you've received that actually influence your health. So we've done a very big data collection. We've visited lots of households in Kenya and in India, talked to women about everything, their relationship with their husband, how often they breastfeed their children, what they cook, when they go to bed, what they do during a day, whether they're happy or not, etc. And then we analyzed all of this data and then looked at kind of what bubbles up in terms of the key factors that seem to kind of bubble up. And we found like things like, of course, like what you've experienced in your past in terms of, your education, if you've grown up as an orphan, if you didn't have a lot of, support from your family growing up, um, relationship quality with your husband, that all kind of seem to influence whether the woman is actually able to get to the clinic for your health checks ups and live a healthy life. And then in a second phase, we actually then ran a survey in these countries where we collected quantitative data, where we kind of validated all these validated all these factors. And we actually developed what we call in the corporate world a market segmentation. And that segmentation actually broke up the households by their risk to poor health outcomes. So we were actually kind of using statistical methods to kind of understand which households have which kind of factors and how does that kind of associate with poor health. And so that actually helped us to see which households in a particular country would be at highest risk of poor health and what were these factors that was driving this health outcomes. And then this market segmentation was developed into a tool that then actually can help health systems to better target their health strategies and health services to the ones that have the highest risk. So it's basically a risk-based mitigation tool that we developed. So it sits more as a strategic level, but it really helps kind of um, governments and health clinics to kind of take a more user-centered kind of health approach to their whole population.
That's amazing. So, like, going back to the, like, human-centered approach, you sat down with, um, a pregnant lady in, India or Kenya, and all of those interactions, all of that, research has then led to something that you can now roll out to global organizations, governments, health authorities to materially improve the health outcomes for people in their populations.
Yes, and it's kind of built around the woman. It's like the kind of big paradigm shift is that usually health programs focus on one, they focus on malaria or they focus on vaccination. But in our data collection, we actually focused on the woman as a whole human being with a lot of health outcomes. And so it actually helps decision makers to see, okay, if I focus, if I help her on this part, like then I can also fix this health problem, and I can also, look at these other pieces. So it's actually showing that taking a human centered approach, when you actually look at the human as a whole, you can actually might be more efficient in the way that you design your strategies.
That's like so obviously on an intellectual level, that's fascinating, but on a emotional level, that must feel quite special. How does it feel for you to be involved with a project like that?
I mean, it's been a learning process. I mean, in this project, I started as a designer. Then I had to learn everything about data science as we were doing this statistical analysis. And we also had behavioral scientists on the team. So, you bring in new disciplines and you open your horizon. And it's been a lot of work thinking, how do you bring qualitative data, so the complex, messy stories of people, and quantitative data together to make better decisions? Because often the decision makers, they only use numbers. And so actually bringing the numbers and the stories together was a really powerful way to help kind of decision makers, empathize with the problems and also rethink the number that they're seeing, because the number often answers what is the problem, but it doesn't tell you why does that problem exist. And so the qualitative data that we gathered, we were able to show, why is the woman, what's going on in that household? Why is she not appearing in the facility? It's because her mother-in-law doesn't allow her to go. And so if we want to make her come to the facility, we need to talk to the mother-in-law, not the woman. And so it totally changes the strategy that you used to kind of get people to come to the hospital, for example.
Just a quick one, Melanie. I think I can see from both mine and Paul's faces listening to you here, we're both like, wow, this is just incredible work. And yet, even when Paul says to you about, does that feel great emotionally? I can see you like sort of dropping back into almost work mode, right? Do you find it easier to detach yourself from? I mean, you're working on such incredible things, and it's so profound, and there's so much, I guess, emotional stuff that could go into it. Do you find that you have to detach from it in order to get the data that you need to create the best stuff?
Um, wow, that's a big question. I mean, there's definitely, one is very emotionally involved in the work. but maybe because I've been now in this project for 6 years, the first 2 years were most intensive. My head was definitely fully in there, and it was a bit difficult to, not dream about it and not think about it. I think now I'm kind of I've gotten kind of quite used to it. There's a lot of complexity, and while there is there's now a lot of excitement around the project, and I'm all the time looking for what are what are we doing wrong? Where's the catch? What's not working? So I'm a little bit, I don't want to hype the work too much, because in every work you know there's also things that maybe are not that ideal. So for example, I've been thinking a lot about, we have all this data, and it's a detailed data about the households. It can easily be misused for, like, let's say, if you know which household has, has the kind of biggest gaps in something, I can start targeting them. And, corporates could come in and sell stuff to them. And so we are working, of course, right now to make sure that the data is only used by people who have legitimate kind of interests. But there might be some unintended consequences that we also need to kind of be open to kind of researching and being aware of. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, it definitely did. I think, yeah, it's I can, especially like you said at the beginning, the first 2 years, just dreaming about it, I can imagine.
And I think it's very different when kind of comparing working with human-centered design in the corporate kind of sector versus in the public sector, is that, in companies usually have a quite contained target audience, and, you might go after the early adopters, or it's easy to reach them. You have a very close relationship with them, and you know whether you're successful by, seeing if they buy your products, right? But on the public health side, your client is your population. And so you can't just pick, okay, even though the tool that we've developed might help you just pick one, the idea is actually we need to cater to everyone, right? And then also, people are not paying you for your services. So, how to motivate, how to design for behavior change that kind of doesn't have that transaction between, I want to buy this service and I'm paying for it. So that value exchange doesn't always happen. And so that requires like a little bit different approach in thinking through how do you design your services.
Melanie, tell us, what's coming up for you next? What are you looking forward to in 2025?
Yeah, so actually, this whole journey into applying design in health has kind of really rooted me deeply in health sciences. So I think my newest adventure is that I actually started a PhD in health sciences. And that's next level studying now for me, because, yeah, studying design was all about creativity and exploration. And now being in health, it's all about rigorous processes and doing your homework. So that's kind of my challenge this year, balancing work and study, but it's definitely a very interesting challenge, and I feel the right way for me to continue my professional journey. I think the other thing is, I'm still learning to be a design leader in a remote global setup. It's really challenging. Like, design is about being with people in the room. I love when I have a workshop and I can listen to people and I can draw stuff, but right now all my work is remote, my team is remote, and it still takes me to kind of develop, how do I, what tools do I use, what's the right type of leadership to get everybody together to innovate, think creatively. So that's also still a journey that I'm on.
Final couple of questions, Melanie. Obviously, this is a beautiful business podcast. What does beautiful business mean to you?
Yeah, I actually, I think it's beautiful business is in tune with and not at the expense of people and the planet. And I actually think that Kate Raworth has written a book about beautiful business with the donut economy. Like, how she outlines that each business should take the social foundation as a basis and not shoot beyond the sustainable, I don't know how she calls it, but the outer ring, kind of taking taking into consideration we're keeping within the resources of our planet. So I think there's no better guidance than that book. So that's definitely still an inspiration for me.
Yeah, it's been an inspiration for me too. And I suppose it's slight diversion, but could you imagine a point that where a government took on the policies of donut economics, where they talk about like regenerative um, model rather than just this like constant growth after growth after growth? Like effectively, she argues that it's, and when you look at it that way, it's just unsustainable, right? So I suppose my question is to clarify. My question is, could you imagine a government, certainly like in the Western world, taking on the policy of like a regenerative economic model?
I would hope so. And I think that there are some little experiments underway. If I'm not completely wrong, I know that I think the city of Amsterdam is implementing the donut economy as their kind of main model. I think I've read that somewhere. And I think some pieces have been tried in Helsinki with the city council. So I think it's happening right now, maybe more on a city level, but I would love if a leader would come along and take that up in their government.
Yeah, if they could get elected on those policies. Um, Thank you. So final question. What piece of advice would you have for our listeners out there who are trying to build beautiful businesses themselves?
I think, I mean, cu- I think a curiosity towards challenging your own assumptions. I think, especially as business leaders, the more experience you have, the more you feel you know how to run the ship. But there's actually a lot to learn at all times, and sometimes you might be the person who's looking at the things in the wrong way. So finding places in which you can get challenged with your own assumptions. And I think that involves listening to voices that are usually not heard. So if you're in a business and you haven't heard from, certain employees, maybe the silent ones that usually don't speak up in meetings, maybe you should go and talk to them. They usually have very, very important things, observations to say that could inform your business. Last thing I guess is I've never been like a business driven person. I always as we started the podcast, for me work is play. I always wanted to do good things, and I do think that money follows if you do good things. So not having money as your primary kind of goal um releases you of a lot of pressure, but it doesn't mean that you can't be successful in the end.
Yeah, money's just a scoreboard, right? I absolutely love that. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Um, Melanie, thank you so much for joining us today. We're
Yeah.
really lucky to have had you on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Melanie.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and thanks for hosting me.
Thanks so much, Paul. Thanks again to Melanie. And if you like this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe and share. We release episodes every fortnight, and we've got some great ones coming up. See you next time. Thank you for listening to the Beautiful Business Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, then please remember to subscribe and leave us a review. For more advice and practical tips on what it's really like to build a beautiful business, visit our content hub at wowco.uk/hub or check out the link in the show notes.